Welcome back to the Vault with Wayne Gorman. I'm in a different room today, as you can probably tell. But here's a question. So how do you sleep, if at all? So if you're suffering with your mental health, or have done, one of the things you're likely to have suffered with, if your mental health has depreciated enough, which is not a good thing, is your sleep. And there's a lot of confusion over sleep and what you have control over and what you don't. So I thought that was an interesting point to bring up today on this video, is insomnia or lack of sleep, however you want to frame it, and what you can and what you can't do about it, and what is useful and what isn't useful. Oh, there's my computer doing strange things because I've only just switched it on. That's very noisy. Don't do that again. So let's see if I can mute that somehow. I don't know how to do that. Turn it down on the speakers maybe. That might help. There we go. Right, so yeah, how do you sleep at night? Well, I've experienced lack of sleep and it's no fun. First thing I'll say about sleep is it's amazing how people that haven't suffered with their mental health, so once upon a time I hadn't, and it was taken for granted that I could sleep. Never even crossed my mind that there'd be any such thing as not being able to sleep. I mean, obviously I've tossed and turned when it's been hot and the weather's been clammy. Your body temperature can affect your sleep. If I've worked nights in the past and things like that, or early mornings, just strange shifts, that can kind of upset your sleep-wake cycle. If you're being posh, you'd call it the circadian rhythm. The 24-hour cycle that your body goes through. I mean, you can research this. I'm not going to go into that on this video. But the circadian rhythm is a 24-hour cycle, and it's to do with body temperature, I believe, and your inbuilt clock. Allegedly, you've got a clock in your brain for your sleep and wake cycle. It's amazing, the brain. And yeah, so that'll, dependent upon light and things like that. So at the daytime, you wake up, certain chemicals, hormones, whatever's going on in the brain. You don't really need to know in that much detail. You just know that I don't feel tired. Keep it nice and simple. The sun's up, I'm up. Come nighttime, then your brain will respond to darkness. And again, without going into detail there, into some kind of neuroscience lesson, which you don't need to study, by the way, if you're suffering with your mental health. You don't need to know the ins and outs of a cat's you-know-what, to do with how the brain works, how neurons fire, the amygdala and all this kind of stuff. It's really not that important. The only thing it will do, if you start learning things like that, is help build your confidence, and probably wake up what they call, I think, is the executive suite at the front of your brain, forefront of your brain, where all the thinking and rational decisions take place, and therefore neurologically your brain can heal and be of more use to you than not. So yeah, I've not studied the brain in great detail. You don't need to. It's helpful if you want to learn, if it's an interest, because interest displaces depression. So from that point of view, it's not a bad thing, but it's not necessary to get well if you're not able to sleep. So that being said, I had purchased books, or a book on insomnia and sleep problems. I read little bits of it. It just went into sleep-wake cycles, what they call rapid eye movement sleep, I think, REM, and all this kind of stuff. So overcoming insomnia, that was a book that I read little bits of. I didn't read it all. Generally, when I buy a book, as you can see here, I've got them here, I go, smell the paper, that smells nice, and put it back on the shelf and never read it again. So I haven't read half these books that I've got on my shelf. I've bought them in good faith thinking I'll read that, and I don't bother. So if you want a bedroom that makes you look intelligent, that's the way to go. So back to sleep, or not, depending upon what's going on with your brain. Yeah, taking it for granted is a big thing when you're well. In fact, you don't know any different. And then as you suffer with things like depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and you can become lazy, lethargic, your brain deteriorates over time, and then imbalances, people call them chemical imbalances. Whatever the imbalance is, it ain't working normally, as in my sleep wake cycle has been upset. And so I can lie in bed and then I'll wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and I'll clock watch. Oh my God. So what happens is you get sleep deprivation, and then you start worrying about the sleep deprivation. So it becomes a double negative. So I can't sleep, and now I'm trying to sleep. So if you try to sleep when you can't sleep, it'll make it worse. So lying down on your back with your eyes closed, if you don't go to sleep and you're tossing and turning and you're in bed for, let's just say, an hour, something like that, and it's not happening, and you're suffering with your mental health, one of the best things that I found was, forget it. You're not going to sleep at that time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get up and I'm going to do house chores, because that is being productive. So you'd be surprised what you can get done when you don't sleep. So if under normal circumstances you have between 6 and 9 hours sleep, which most people do, some people need more, some people need less. But on average, I'd say that was pretty accurate. Between 6 and 9 hours, most people will sleep. When you don't get that and you only get 1 or 2 hours sleep, and then you're awake and you're looking at the clock and it's catastrophized time. So you look at that time, you see it's 1 a.m, you close your eyes, you're unconscious for a little bit, maybe a semi-conscious state, it's not a deep sleep. You're aware that you're not sleeping, you're resting, but it's not quality. And then you open your eyes again, and then it's 2:30, then it's 3:30, it's 3:45, whatever it is, and you'll continue to clock watch, thinking, oh, that's all I've had to sleep. And so what happens then is you start catastrophizing over the lack of sleep, which again creates further problems, because now you're doing hatred towards the fact that you can't sleep. So I've said in other videos, it's about learning, if you want to call it learning, or unlearning a behavior. So if you catastrophize and you look at the clock and you catch yourself doing it because it's a habit, it's like, oh, I'm doing it again. So you're interrupting the hatred towards the activity. So normally you'd look at it, you catastrophize, I've only had X amount of sleep, or I haven't slept at all, when you have had sleep, because you'll always jump to the worst conclusion. It's normally not as bad as you think, the amount of sleep you've had, but you'll be catastrophizing if you're not well and you're not sleeping very well. So that's something to be aware of. So when you look at the clock and you see it's 1:30 in the morning, you realize I've done it again. I've turned the alarm towards me and I've seen that clock, whether it's a green display, a white display, or a red one, whatever those digits are at that time in the morning. And then you go, oh my God, I've had no sleep. To reverse that, first of all, you become aware that you're doing it. Secondly, you become aware that it's not helpful, because I'm doing more hatred towards the fact that I haven't had any sleep. So we have to let go of that habit. By letting go of that habit, you then probably will be left with the habit of checking it, but then you won't catastrophize. And then at that point, you catch yourself doing it and you go, oh, I'm doing it again. I'm looking at the clock again. I'm going down that route again, right? So eventually you'll give up that and resist the urge to look at the clock at all, because otherwise you're going to start making judgments about how little sleep you've had. Or if you have a little bit more one night, you'll start going, oh, this is brilliant, I'm starting to sleep well now. And then the following night you won't, and you'll be like, oh, I'm back to square one. So you're on an emotional roller coaster, and you don't want to be on one of them. You want to start leveling out, because your emotions are up and down and they're all over the place. So clock watching isn't helpful. The other thing is, you don't have any choice in the matter. Once you become at a certain level of sickness mentally, whether you like it or not, you are not going to sleep, and that has to be accepted unless you find a medical intervention. So I'm not going to promote things like Zopiclone. I took that. It made me feel like I was drunk. I couldn't walk straight to go to the toilet. My head felt like it weighed a ton, and it was crazy. So that probably got me about an hour's sleep when I was on a drug called Zopiclone. And because the doctors don't always think through as carefully as they should, they had me on two things, an SSRI or an antidepressant and Zopiclone, and the two shouldn't have been taken together, and that made things worse. So it took me to point that out, and this is why I say challenge doctors when you're being prescribed things, because I actually spoke to a doctor on the phone about this, and their words to me were, Wayne, I can see that you're going to be able to help yourself to get well. Because I was challenging what the doctors were giving me, what the doctors were saying I was required. And not at first, but then eventually I started thinking something's not right here. And this is why I would say, I'm not going against doctors per se. And if it wasn't for things like mirtazapine, I don't know where I would be today. So they helped slow down a lot of thinking, a very, very active mind. And it got to a stage where I had no control over whatsoever. The amount of thinking that was going on, it was off the scale. There was that much data going through my mind at one point. The only thing that I can liken it to is, like I just joked about reading a book. If you get a book and you go like this and you flick through it, that's about how fast the data was running through my mind. There was no way I was sleeping. Sweat pouring out of me. Sweat was waking me up, tickling my chest. My bed sheets were soaked. I was getting about an hour's sleep, if that. I eventually went on a phased return to work, and when I was going to work, I had to finish half day because I couldn't cope. I'd come home and I would be in semi-conscious states, catching flies with my mouth open, and I'd be aware of it, but I was just a zombie. So if you're at that stage, finding something that can help you sleep, because sleep deprivation makes it worse, is a good action plan. So if you can find an SSRI that agrees with you, for me it was mirtazapine, for you it might be sertraline or whatever the other names are, the other ones, then sleep is a big thing to aid recovery. So once you start getting sleep, you can start building your confidence. When you don't have any energy at all to do anything to help yourself, you're in a little bit of trouble. So getting a bit of sleep, even if it's 4 hours, that's better than 1 or 2. But catastrophizing is something that happens, which is the clock watching. So eventually let go of that habit. It's not helpful. Finding a medical intervention if it's required. If you can do it on your own and you've got the energy to build your confidence and go through talk therapy or CBT or whatever option that you go down. For me, I had hours and hours of self-therapy. So when I was going back to work in between jobs, I would talk to myself in between journeys. Sometimes it took me 2 hours to get to a job, and I would be constantly talking to myself, reframing everything that was going on. And it was almost self-therapy, if you like. So I was answering my own questions as if I was a therapist. Then I was imagining myself help other people who might have similar things going on. And I was the therapist in that session, and I was talking to them and answering the questions. And this was always, it was thousands of hours of doing this. It went on for a long time. But eventually, mine started settling down as my confidence levels started coming back a little bit. And there is light at the end of the tunnel. So sleep deprivation is a big thing. It can cause digestive issues, so you don't feel hungry the same times as you normally would. You could be starving at 3 in the morning and you might not eat for, I don't know, days. So that's part of your sleep-wake cycle, and the circadian rhythm is appetite, body temperature. So obviously my body temperature was all over the place. My nervous system was shot. I was having like stabbing pains in my toes where my nerves were going off on one, spasms in bed. So my arms were involuntarily being thrown around in the bed, which was crazy. But anyway, not too much of that. This is just literally about sleep. So what do? You refrain from checking your clock. You have medical interventions if required, and you work in the periods where you know you're not going to sleep. So don't bang your head against a brick wall, tossing and turning for 4 hours and staying in the bed. Get up and do something productive, and you can give yourself a pat on the back for that. It's a reward for doing something productive. Otherwise, you're beating yourself up. You're telling yourself that you can't sleep when actually it's your body. If your brain is at a certain point where it's call it atrophy, or it's depreciated to a certain point where there's an imbalance in the chemicals with regards to sleep. Melatonin, I think, is one of those things that helps. Then there'll be disruption, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it's not to be taken personally. It's your body's response to, I don't know, if you've been suffering with anxiety, you could have like cortisol, adrenaline, and whatever these things do to the body. Again, you don't really need to know. All you need to know is, well, I'm not sleeping and something's not quite right, and it's my body's response to the trauma, the depression, the anxiety, the low self-esteem, the doubting yourself all the time. And eventually that's what happens. The nervous system goes awry. It doesn't work as it usually does. You're not firing on all cylinders. You get sleep deprivation. You can hallucinate a little bit sometimes. These aren't things to worry about though. It's just, okay, I'm sleepy, you know, seeing shadows or walls bending a little bit, and nothing too dramatic. Sounds, audible sounds, crunching noises, banging noises, screaming noises, things like that. They're all common, and they're nothing to get freaked out about. It's just part of the healing process. So don't worry too much if things like that happen, or you see anything going across your field of vision. I mean, I had little seahorses coming across all the time. I don't know what that was all about, but it's almost like there was another lens. And when you're trying to sleep as well, with your eyes closed, normally, if in the day you close your eyes, you just see pink. At night, it'll be pitch black. Well, certain drugs and certain things that have gone on in the brain, you can see lights, flashing lights, almost like fireworks. Looks like little neurons firing in the brain. Again, nothing to worry about. Just observe and don't make any judgments over whether these things are good or bad. Initially, you might have an emotional reaction to it, but then it's kind of just like leveling out and going, right, I'm just basically watching, right? I'm observing, and you learn not to make judgments, and eventually you'll come out of it, you'll settle down, your sleep will improve, your confidence will build, and you'll be on the road to recovery. And then it's just about knowing that you've got no control over certain things in the brain, and if you're not sleeping. So the main thing is, don't beat yourself up over it if you don't sleep. Don't take it personally, or I'll say try not to take it personally, because you will to begin with, and then you learn that that's not helpful, and eventually you'll get well. So talk to people that know, talk to people that have been there and done it, read books if it helps, and I wish you all the best in recovering from sleep problems, because taking ownership of the fact of why you've got where you've got as well is a big thing. So you're less likely to beat yourself up if you just surrender to the fact that, look, this is the way it is. I'm not going to be able to sleep. It's not up to me. So again, I've said in other videos, whether it's karma, whether it's just your body's physical reaction, whether it's God punishing you, who knows? The fact is, you're not sleeping, right? And by telling yourself the same story over and over again like a broken record and looking at your clock, it's not going to help. In fact, it'll only make it worse. So unlearning that behaviour is a good idea, because you never used to do that when you were sleeping. So we revert back to what we never used to do. So that's it for today on insomnia and sleep problems, and I'll catch you next time in the next video. See you later.